So, in this segment, we're going to be talking about Poland struggling to deal with the strain of the Ukrainian refugees in terms of the human cost, in terms of space and resources. Poland is struggling, Polish towns are struggling, and kind of go into a broader conversation of how countries really should help each other during refugee crises rather than doing what countries normally do, which is it's just for the neighbouring countries to deal with it. We'll give some support, sure, but you're in the area, you have to deal with it. Kind of how people always talk about how people go through safe countries to get to other countries like the UK, when these countries can't cope with the amount of refugees that pass through these safer countries. It's people in their thousands, especially for a country like Poland, which doesn't have the resources that the UK has, or even a France or a Germany, for example. So you got to feel for these kids, you really do. So we'll go into this article first, and we'll go into a broader conversation. The kicks are high and the punch is straight, but the Ukrainian children here are delivering them in an environment of peace, a karate class for new arrivals in eastern Poland. 14 students are given basic moves by a Polish teacher who ensures there's plenty of laughter for this hour at least. The trauma they've gone through in the past fortnight is replaced by enjoyment, which is, it's good that they're giving these kids something to do and, activities, but they'll never forget what they've seen. Some of them have family back at home fighting for real. 14-year-old Dari Gluck, I'm going to struggle to pronounce names, hasn't heard from his father in 3 days, and he's worried because it could be the case that his father's been killed. We don't know, and that's what's sad. It's always going to be on his mind. The emotions make it hard to feel settled here. In Poland, it is very cool, he says, but we want to go home because home is home. And, that's the thing that people don't realise with refugees is, like, once the war is over, some of them will want to go home because that's where they feel they belong. His cousin Sasha Mineyev, 17, appreciates the temporary distraction. When we're in the karate class, we forget about the war in that moment, he says, but when it ends, we remember again. We understand we must do all we can to help the people in Ukraine. It's a really nice area. The class takes place in the small eastern Polish town of Zamosk, population 60,000. It's not really a huge town. On some days, up to 35,000 people have arrived, most going on further west, but some staying. 35,000 people on some days. It's just wild. Like, how is a country or how is a town supposed to deal with that amount of people, given that that's over half the population of the town arriving in that place in one day? Yes, some people are, move on or are moved on, but the simple fact is you can't cope with this sort of situation. Around 1,000 beds have been provided at the reception centre, schools, private homes, and even the sports club where the karate class takes place. Left alone, the mayor, Andris Wunuk, says it's a huge strain on Zamosk, warning that the welcome has its limits, which is true, that you can't run humanitarian efforts off the goodwill of people, because goodwill doesn't last forever. It doesn't last long because people are giving up a lot to help people, which is the right thing to do, but how much can you give up in terms of living space or resources when this is what nation states and governments are meant to do. It's meant to step in when realistically charity shouldn't even exist. It should be governments that deal with it, but especially in these cases, governments should have done a lot more to help these people. Polish people seem indefinitely ready to give, but it will end one day, the mayor said. We thought there would be a first wave of refugees and then we would get significant support from the government and the EU, but it turns out we were left alone. We need financial help or the quality of our hospitality will drop drastically because they won't be able to feed all of these people or house them. The impulse in Zamosk is to offer refuge is partly due to its history as a place that has known the cost of oppression. Almost half its pre-war population, some 12,000 people, were Jews. During the occupation, first by the Soviets and then the Nazis, most were sent to the ghetto here and then sent to concentration camps and most likely were killed. Let's be honest, most of these people would have been killed. A monument to the tragedy, made from the headstones in the town's old Jewish cemetery, stands on the outskirts. The locals here are proud of their heritage of hospitality extended to the new arrivals. The restaurant at the Renaissance Hotel is now only cooking for refugees. In the kitchen, pots of Ukrainian beetroot soup and fruit compote bubble away as staff box up portions of pork ribs and pasta. And these, by the looks of it, aren't the money isn't funded from charities or from governments. This looks like money from the citizens of this town, which again they won't be able to fund this forever. And this is where the Polish government, especially the EU and the British government, should have stepped in here with far more aid for these areas, because where these refugees are going to go, to the towns closest to them that are out of the war. And this is just so shambolic that it's taking so long to help. The owner, Damien, says as a father, it was a natural decision to change his business once he saw children fleeing the war. He says, "I can't believe Polish people are responding like this." He says it's nice to see, but he says he's running short of money and can only continue offering the handouts for another 2 weeks. After that, I will think about what I can do. Essentially, after that, if I don't have the money to keep this going, I can't continue to do this. Help from the world. The food is delivered to the main shelter where 300 volunteers help out. All the while, buses arrive with new arrivals and others leave, taking those on board to richer cities in the west, where many of the refugees have friends or family. "We need help from the world," says Barbara, a town hall employee now helping to serve hot food. "Everyone looks at us and gives us a bravo, but it's too small." And again, it's kind of that, the UK's government attitude of clapping carers and hospital workers. When you need to give financial support, you need to give resources to these people to help them. Someone needs to tell us what we can do with the refugees. If the numbers continue like this, I'm afraid maybe they'll go on the street to sleep because every hotel is full. And, I don't know if these hotels are offering places for free or if the council or the government are covering it, but the simple fact is it's unsustainable. And, this is not a dig at the Ukrainian people. This is a dig at, Western governments have done very little, especially in years gone by in refugee crises. In the space of a fortnight, Poland has gone from rejecting migrants, and it's interesting the BBC calls them migrants when a migrant is a person who moves from one place to another, especially to find work or better living conditions. How would people from the Middle East get all the way? Why would they come all the way to Europe just for a slightly better life? They're most likely refugees. The only way to know that is to put them through the process to look at their asylum claims. Poland, a country that's gone, being very brutal towards refugees from the Middle East and other countries to welcome in people from Ukraine. And you could talk about a shared geography, shared history, and all this stuff, but the simple fact is, Poland were okay with accepting, let's be real here, white people into their country and getting rid of people who are darker skinned. There is a discomfort among some Poles with what appears to be a volte-face by their government, pushing away mainly Muslim men of Syria to welcome in the predominantly white Christian women and children of Ukraine. And as the fighting worsens in Ukraine and begins to spread to the west, towns like Zamosk are wondering how long can they cope, which is true. The simple fact is, we need to do a lot more to help the people fleeing from war zones. That's the top and bottom of it, really. This article is a couple of weeks old. I've been trying my best to keep an eye on it. It's about just over a week from time of recording, and you can see here Poland blocks hundreds of quote migrants, when most likely these people are refugees. Would a person who's looking for a better life, a slightly better economic life, go through all of this trouble to leave their homeland, to leave their continent for this? Poland says it's repelled attempts by I'm going to call it refugees. I'm not quoting the article when it says migrants, to enter the country at its eastern border with Belarus, warning that thousands more people were on their way. And Belarus has very much weaponized this. But the simple fact is you can't control the actions of Belarus, but you can control the actions of yourself. And in this case, Poland's been very shameful in this regard. Video footage showed hundreds of people near a barbed wire border fence which tried to force their way through. Poland has accused Belarus of pushing refugees towards the border, describing it as hostile activity. Poland, Lithuania and Latvia says there's been a surge in the number of people trying to enter their country illegally from Belarus in recent months. Many of them have come from the Middle East and Asia. The European Union has accused Belarus authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko of facilitating the influx in retaliation against sanctions. But the real question is, why is the EU allowing this to happen when the EU and the UK have to take a much better approach to refugees? You see how they've allowed a lot of Ukrainian people in. But the simple fact is these people should be let in to process their asylum claims. that's what should be happening. It just doesn't make sense. Would you travel so far with your child in order to go to a country that's, a very long distance, completely different to your home country, just because you're looking for a slightly better life? It doesn't make sense. Conditions for refugees at the border are hostile to the point of being deadly, and fears have been raised over their safety in the region's sub-zero winter. I think people have died because of Poland's actions here. As they are summarily expelled from Poland and Belarus refuses to allow them back in, people are finding themselves stranded and freezing in Poland's forests. Several have died from hypothermia, and yes, Belarus have weaponized this, but the simple fact is Belarus knew or would have known Poland would have reacted like this. The only thing you can control in this world is yourself, and the simple fact is Poland have been very shameful. Not just Poland, Latvia as well, and the other countries in the region. But the simple fact is, if they allowed these people into these countries, does Poland have the resources to help them and process their applications properly? Probably not, and that's where other countries in Europe should have stepped in and said, look, we'll help you out, we'll process some of the claims here, we'll let people come here in order to help you guys out at the border. When simple fact is, Poland and other countries have looked at the situations in Italy and Greece and said, yeah, good luck, buddy. When it came to refugees crossing in the Mediterranean Sea, when if the EU took a coherent approach to dealing with refugees, this would have been a far better situation. BBC's Paul Adams spoke to Bawa Ahmed, the brother of one of the Iraqi refugees who was at the border with his wife and 3 children, saying they arrived in Minsk, the capital of Belarus, last month. And what's not clear is if Belarus is flying over these people from Iraq to use them against Poland and the EU. That's not very clear. It could be the case. For months, Belarus EU neighbours have been accusing Lukashenko regime of weaponizing refugees in revenge for successive waves of EU sanctions on Minsk. He probably is doing that. Refugees have told us numerous stories of the role played by Belarusian soldiers in helping them make illegal crossings into Poland and Lithuania. They share concentration of numbers at a single crossing point, along with the presence of Belarusian soldiers apparently doing nothing to stem the flow of refugees to the border. Suggests that once again it is being orchestrated. And obviously, it very much looks like Belarus are using people as a weapon. But the simple fact is, it's up to individual nation states and how to deal with these situations. The Belarusian Border Guard Agency told state media that more than 2,000 refugees had amassed in front of Polish barriers and were heading to the EU where they want to apply for protection, the agency said. And the question is, protection from who? Which is something we'll talk about in a second. But you've got 2,000 refugees here, which is far less than the 35,000 refugees going from Ukraine to Poland, for example. And if we look here, is there still a war in Iraq? The main phases of the conflict ended the defeat of the Islamic State in the country in 2017, but there are still low-level insurgency attacks happening in parts of Iraq, northern Iraq. And if you live in those parts, why would you want to live in a country where there's constant threats and insurgencies? Let's not forget the war ended in 2017, and I think the war began in around 2014. So this was a country very much under warfare for a long time. And let's not also forget that the Iraqi government sucked. Between kind of the rise of ISIS and the end of Saddam, the Iraqi government was not a good government. There's a bit more I want to talk about. For those people who say, why don't countries in neighbouring areas do more? Pakistan, not a rich country by any means, took in around 1.4 million Afghans after the re-emergence of the Taliban. So countries in neighbouring states do help out. The problem is they don't have the resources that Western countries have typically to deal with them. Yes, the Arab Gulf countries suck. They don't help when they should do. That's true. But again, you can't police their actions. The only ones you can deal with are yourselves. And the simple fact is, especially the British government with Priti Patel, have really abhorrent records when it comes to helping refugees. We go to Google Maps, which is, Iraq all the way down here. How are they getting to Belarus? That's a question, because they have to go through multiple countries. You've got Azerbaijan, Georgia, potentially Ukraine or Russia to get to Belarus, unless they're being flown over, where Belarus is deliberately using them as weapons. But, some of these neighbouring countries that, like Saudi Arabia, aren't taking in refugees, but the simple fact is, these people have travelled a very long distance to get to the Poland-Belarus border. and it does show you how desperate they are for help. These people are looking for protection. And, it should be the case that, if we had a coherent strategy when it came to refugees, if countries really helped each other out when it came to refugees, be it giving more, financial support, helping countries deal with asylum claims, but also taking people on, giving them a place to live whilst their asylum claims are being processed, it would help out a lot. But, it just doesn't, governments haven't figured that out yet. And the other point is, you can't go around countries destabilizing governments, because this is how one of the ways you cause refugee crises. Also, you can't go around supporting dictators of countries either, because that is another way you cause refugee crises. It's really just painful, to be honest, that we've gotten to this year, multiple refugee crises from the Middle East and African countries where, people still don't get it. The only way to really deal with these crises isn't by, trying to force people to stay where they are in, really horrible conditions. It's to try and help them as best they can, help them, get support, to actually live life properly, not in refugee camps and constantly struggling, not knowing what to do, to get help. And it's just sad, to be honest. Anyways, look, I'm going to leave it there. I've rambled on for a long time. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. If you have anything productive to say, comment it. If not, just don't bother typing. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one.